recording now.
Hello everyone, I'm Jose Rivera, the CEO of CSIA. Thank you for attending this month's CSIA webinar. Today's webinar is about management help where it's needed most, which aids in the transformation from engineer to leader, specifically in the interaction with people. Be sure to ask a question. Interaction makes the webinar more engaging and interesting. Please ask the questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. Questions will be answered during the webinar, so be sure to ask them. The webinar will be archived for later viewing, and the slides will be available also. The host and sponsor of our monthly web business topic webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but are investing in a relationship where you depend on your suppliers to be there every step of the way. This month's Software Toolbox asks, is your team delivering all the value it could for your customers' reporting systems? Deliver more value with Dream Reports. Visit softwaretoolbox.com/Dream Report for more information. I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Anthony Balasek. Tony is an engineering manager at Premier System Integrators, a CSIA certified member in the greater Nashville area. He holds a BS in aerospace engineering, an MBA and PhD in business administration. Tony is also a certified project management professional by the Project Management Institute and is certified Myers Briggs Type Indicator practitioner. Tony has held a successful career in product and solution design and engineering management at renowned companies like Tyco Electronics, Osram Sylvania, Triumph Group, and now Premier System Integrators. So without further delay, here's Tony.
Thank you, Jose, and good day, everybody. Glad to see you here. Today we're going to talk about the Myers Briggs Type Indicator a little bit and how that may help you as managers and management at your companies. One of the things that I like to start off with, but it looks like Jose already beat me to it, which is just some background on myself. Why am I talking to you today? And I do have quite a bit of years experience in engineering and manufacturing, as well as the MBTI certified practitioner. I've been using this for quite a long time, and a little bit about that is that it is a very powerful tool to help you improve if you're trying to deal with our toughest critics are the people. And that's one of the things that I learned pretty early in my career, and certainly as I progressed into the management area, is that I was always good at solving problems. However, one of the things I realized is that a lot of the problems I was solving was not human problems. So when I certainly got into the management area, one of the things that, as all of you know, if you are managers, is that certainly our biggest problem is not things, it's dealing with people issues. And this is one very powerful tool that helps you learn those things. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it today and how it may help you as well. First and foremost, the MBTI instrument is used by most of the Fortune 100 companies. It is the most widely used personality assessment in the world. So that's 2 million a year, and that is across, again, the globe, and it's across many languages, as you can see, and many countries. And that leads some credence to it because, and certainly in any research or statistical models, one of the biggest concerns is generalization. And the nice thing about this is no matter where you're at, no matter what culture you're from, no matter what language you speak, it's still pretty accurate. So I'm a proud user of it myself, and I use it probably every day. Sometimes now, I guess, maybe a little instinctively, but it's certainly something that I think about often as I approach problems. Again, as many of you know, sitting in my office, most of the people come to my office aren't telling me all the good things that are happening. They're telling me it's usually some problem that I need to get involved with or something that I need to fix. And most of that time it is dealing with our colleagues, our peers, our customers, our vendors, you know, you name it, any relationship that we have, any opportunity for communication errors is the MBTI is something that can be useful. So I want to start here is what not to use this for. And many people ask me this quite frequently when I go through. In fact, we're just going through our reassessments on our audits this year, and I got asked this there as well. So one of the big myths is that the MBTI should be used in hiring, or can it be used in hiring to find candidates that fit the new job? And the answer should be no. If anybody tells you that, yeah, sure, you can use this, well, only technically. And we'll get into the reasons why in a little bit, but this is really important because of the nature of the MBTI. It's not something that tells you who you are and that's it. That's all you're capable of doing. But it does highlight your preferences. And that leaves it up to you to fill in the gaps with training, with experience, and you know, with the wisdom of your teams that you're working on to fill in the gaps. So one caution there is if somebody's telling you that they'd like to use it for this, or that's something that you may be asking yourself, the answer should be no. And the reason is because you can learn to do any of these things. It just might not be your preference. I'll just skip that one. Another thing I get introduced to a lot is the engineering mindset. Myself being an engineer, people look at me when they say, why are you involved with the MBTI assessment? Isn't that just social science and there's nothing behind that? You know, it's just chicken bones and voodoo. And I'm here to tell you that it's not. I use it again very regularly, if not daily, in my discussions, how I approach people, how I solve some problems with those. And there is some good solid science out there. I'm just going to touch on that briefly here today. I'm not going to go into all the research. There's a whole MBTI manual that talks nothing about statistics, but I am going to show you some of the highlights that does add some credence to this and how it's again, being an engineer myself, I don't want to use anything that's just you know, what type of dog are you type assessment is not the thing that I'm really looking into. So I stay away from those, and I'm trying to use something that can help me, help my company, and help those that I work with. And this is some of the statistics that we do have on the MBTI. And it's not a horoscope. It's a very reliable instrument. In fact, these numbers that you see on your screen here, 0.9 for internal consistency reliability, is pretty impressive by any statistical measure if you're familiar with research design, as well as the test-retest correlation is very high as well. What do those mean? Basically, the first number is the questions, is the instrument measuring what it's supposed to measure? That's basically what that tells you in a nutshell. And the second set of numbers there, the range, the 0.83 to 0.97, basically tells you that it's not time dependent. You can take it now, you can take the assessment 20 years from now, and it still comes out the same way, which is a very high number amongst all statisticians if you look into research. Just in general, I threw up this little chart, and this tells you, our basic population in the United States. So this is a little generalized here, but even across the globe, it doesn't differ from this too much. A little bit, but not whole percentage points in most cases. But what you can see here, and I would ask you to focus on the panel on the right, while there are 16 personality preference types in general, they are broken up amongst the four dichotomies, the EI, SN, TF, and JP, and I'll go into what those mean a little bit with you here shortly. But as you can see, it's pretty much you got 50% roughly in the middle. The SN is a little heavily weighted towards the S scale. T and F a little heavily weighted towards the F scale, and then a 50-50 split roughly on the J and the P. So it is pretty well dispersed. There's a lot of people. You run across people, and what you think would be, well, this is a good engineer, or this would make a good manager. Not always true. Any of these types can be a good manager. They all have to be aware of their preferences, and that's part of the reason we take this today, even if you don't do this with your teams. Being aware of your own preferences is huge when it comes to talking with others, working through problems, because we all have a tendency to project what we want to see, and how we want to hear it onto those that we're trying to help. And that's one of the key elements that you can take away from this if you have the assessment done professionally, is that a simple awareness of your own tendencies can go a long way into helping others. So let's talk about the dichotomies a little bit. And the first dichotomy is this E and I, which is extroversion and introversion. And this is simply, where do we focus our energy, and where do our attention rather, and where do we get our energy? Right? If you look at it this way, some people say, well, Tony, you're an extrovert. I get called that a lot because I do a lot of training and do a lot of presentations. And the reality is I'm not. My preference is introversion. But I've learned extroversion. So it's one of the things that we go back to the hiring slide, if you will. We got to have a manager that just sits in his office all day, and that's true. But introverts can learn extroversion as well. So this is the kind of thing that you see with this extroversion versus introversion preference. Is basically, where do we draw our energy? And a good example would be when you go to a party, for instance. Are you one of the people that want to leave right away and go home, and when you get home you're exhausted, or are you one of those that are the last person to stay, and when it's time to go, that means another 30 minutes because you have to say goodbye to everybody? So that's one of the things. And then when you get home, you can't sleep because you're all energized. So that's just one example, and just the way you feel on that particular notion doesn't typically put you in one camp or the other. It's just an indicator. One of the many questions when you take the assessment. It ranges from anywhere from like 70 questions to 144 questions, depends on the level of assessment that you take. So I wouldn't want you to go just on that, but just one thing to think about. So that's basically extroversion and introversion. The next dichotomy is this sensing or intuition, S and N. And basically this is the way that you take in information and the kind of information you trust. So when we think about an example, the S preference type will typically look for facts and almost need the facts before they trust it. They want to see what has happened that got us here. What are specific details that I need to help me make a decision. This is what I trust. You have to give me the details. The intuitive side of it are looking at more of it from an abstract point of view, typically, and more of a theoretical. Well, how should it be, maybe? Or does this fit my mental model that I think that I'm trying to deal with here right now? So, and if the quote facts aren't always the facts according to an intuitive, they're going to test that against their internal theory or model or things that they've seen like that before they're more apt to act upon it. The third dichotomy is thinking and feeling. And if you think about the logical progression we've gone, it's, where do you get your energy? What kind of information do you trust? And now once you got that energy and once you know what information you have, what do you do with it? This is how you make your decisions. This is the thinking and the feeling. So what do you do with that? How do those people generally differ? The thinking preference will basically take things in a logical, analytical fashion. Now, that's not to say that the folks with the feeling preferences aren't logical. It's just what do they approach and how do they approach problems or have to make decisions what do they use first? Where the feeling preference folks will basically be asking themselves, how will it impact somebody else before I go ahead and make a decision? And that's equally as important. And that's one of the things, in fact, a lot of engineers typically go towards the thinking preference here. And if you think in our lives and in our engineering lives, how many times that has gotten us into trouble? Well, they shouldn't have taken it that way. Or, I don't understand. That's not logical. I don't understand why they feel this way. And then you end up spending twice or 3 times or 10 times as much energy trying to solve the problem that you thought was just a simple answer. And part of the problem here is this not having a good awareness of the feeling preference and how it can affect your communication styles. Judging or perceiving. That's the 4th dichotomy. And with the combination of those 4 things, that's why you end up with 16 total. But the judging and perceiving now tells us how our attitude is towards the external world and how we orient ourselves to it. So basically, one example would be, is the world something that we need to conquer, something that we need to control, or am I just going along with the flow and going where it takes me? And that could be one indicator of the judging or perceiving preference. As an example, the judging types, or the judging preferences, are more likely to work off of a checklist. They're most likely to need the closure. They want to see it done. Sometimes done for the sake of being done instead of being done and doing the right thing. So that's one of the pitfalls of possibly being a judging preference, whereas the perceiving preference is more likely to wait as long as they possibly can so that they can gather as much information as they possibly can, and they want to make sure that they have the most options to pursue while they're going down a path. And you can see on this particular dichotomy causes a lot of communication tension, I guess, in the workplace. At least my experience tells me that this one is one of the big ones as far as how we approach issues, problems, projects, even with customers. If you have one different here, you can see it right away. This person, from a J perspective, a P they wait to the last minute. But from a P's perspective, the J's like, well, okay, they just charged down this path to get it done, and they didn't even consider all the other 3 options that were available to them. Both of those can be true. Both of those can be accurate criticisms as well. So the better we are familiar with each of the other types, the better off that we may be. The old saying, 2 heads are better than 1, 3 or 4 maybe sometimes. But that's generally the idea there is that you get the different perspectives, get the different opportunities to look at things, and sometimes you can that makes for a better solution. So how do you do this? Let's say you take the assessment. How can that help us? And there's a lot of areas that this can help us in. And I've listed a number of them here. And why did I pick these ones? Well, these happen to be ones where I'm going to be doing specific training in the organization that I work with. About specific things, and there's specific exercises and things that you can do to help drive these points home. But you can see there's quite a bit of areas here. And one of the things that you can, if there's one common theme that you can look at and see what's going on here, is the 3rd bullet down, and that's communication. Every one of these bullet points has communication as a key element, if you will. However, you can again, as a manager, as a leader, as a president, or whatever you may be, even if you're not in the management, this is the kind of things that you got to deal with all day long. It's no longer, I need to, fix the loop on this process here, or I need to tweak the system. It's not even about the system anymore. They don't come to you for fixing the technical issues because, quite frankly, we've forgotten how to fix all the technical issues, I think, in a lot of cases. But the reality is these are the things that we got to deal with all the time. They come to us when there's a problem with the customer, or the customer's yelling and screaming at one of our people. What do we do? Or we got some stress on their internal teams. We don't understand why this person doesn't get along with another person. There's a tons of information you can get out of here if you just focus some of this type of training in this specific area. So from here, I'm just going to give you some examples. And this is just a scenario that I come up with to give you an indication. And these aren't just totally made up. These are things that you're likely going to run across in a workplace or in any type of environment that you work in, certainly anything that you manage. And if you're in specific project management, you can see this scenario where a project manager with an ISTJ preference, and again, we'll step back and tell you what that means a little bit, is managing a multi-million-dollar project for the company's second largest account. Key milestones are approaching, and he just realizes that two of his project team members with interdependent tasks are going different directions. Sound familiar? Furthermore, the team is now providing content the customer doesn't really want. The good old gold plating. We can do better even if the customer doesn't want to pay for it. Of course, that's our job to remind them that we are in the business of making money, so we don't like to do work for free too often. But one of the things that you run across is that sometimes the project team is very much introverted, and it's very much has a perceiving preference. What does that mean? How do you, as a manager, with these preferences, ISTJ, work with a team that is largely introverted perceiving? You might think, well, I'm an introvert, and most of my team's an introvert, so therefore there shouldn't be a problem. You would think the bigger problem might be because it's a J versus a P, and that may or may not be the case. So let's look at that for a second. ISTJs, this is the kind of blind spots that person and that team with that particular strength of makeup can have. And you may run across these kinds of blind spots in the projects that you manage on a daily basis and or the teams that you manage in your companies. Blind spots, assuming others know what is being worked on or that they don't need to know. That's an introverted trait that we have to be careful of and be wary of. Making changes and decisions between individuals that are not adequately communicated across the team. Again, introverts are not as likely to proliferate their knowledge or talk, just quite frankly, communicate with others. The frequency is reduced unless it's made aware of and need to deal with. We assume rather than solicit customer needs and desires. We know what they want until they tell us that that's not true. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that happens a little too late. And as you know from design versus design and cost type calculations, that most of the issues happen are too late. It costs 5 times on average the amount of time it takes to fix a problem than it would have taken up front to actually design to mitigate that risk or design it to what the customer really wanted. And the other blind spot that I've listed here is exploring more options that can be completed within budget or schedule. So you, being the manager, have a J preference, and then your team having a P preference. They're looking for options. So how do you give them to them? So these are some of the things that you might do in a case like this. Is these actions to help you get on track is increase the structured communication internally and with the customer. And this is formal meetings. This is formal meetings, meeting minutes, all the beloved things that we like to hear when the auditor comes to town for CSIA. Those are best practices. Those are good things. The auditor's not evil, as you know, but they're there to help us learn about ourselves sometimes more than we thought we already knew. And one of the typical critiques that I hear from auditors when I ask them questions is, weaknesses in our structured communication. And a lot of times when you find that, you find it with with teams that are particularly introverted, or the owners or the management structure is particularly introverted. The other thing you want to do is look at the broader implications of an individual's teamwork, and what are they doing? What are if they do, it's cause and effect. If this person does this, what can it mean somewhere else? And this is one of those problems with having an overly introverted team as well. And then the problem with having a solid P preference team, if you will, is we need to reduce the number of options. Otherwise, we don't get closure. How many times we get down to, well, we need to make a decision. When are we going to make a decision? Well, I don't know. I have to think about it. Could we try this, 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 and this? And the answer is, well, no, or we're going to be late. Well, I can't. A lot of the P preference folks, they need that. That's what they're looking for. Have you considered the options? Now, it doesn't mean that you just shut them up, tell them to go back and live with it, but it does mean that, that's what they're looking for is options. And in the spirit of keeping the project on schedule, you can't necessarily pursue every option. So how do you do that? How do you get it, to reduce the number of options that you can to help push for that closure? Let's switch over into another topic, and that is selling. And again, as Jose mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them up, and we'll answer them as best I can. Here's your scenario. A salesperson with an ESTP preference is working with a manufacturing company to sell engineering services. The key decision maker is also an engineer, but that person exhibits ISTJ preferences. Now, we're all in the business of selling a little bit. That's part of our management responsibilities as well, is to talk to customers. And one of the things that you'll find is, typical people, that sell are extroverted more often, I think, than introverted. Not always, but that's a typical preference combination that you see there is that. And so, how does that person deal with an ISTJ preference? And one of the famous things that we've all been built into our head is engineers don't particularly like salespeople all that much. In fact, we try to run from them, ignore them, avoid them, or we call out the dogs and we say this doesn't smell right. So we all know when we're being sold, and quite frankly, a lot of us don't like it. I think that would apply to a lot of engineers. So when you get this quote pushy salesperson, what do we do with that person? So how does this person then, a salesperson in this perspective, how does that person prepare for an upcoming meeting with the person that's just like I described, that would rather not deal with sales? Well, one of the blind spots that the ESTP preference would have is they typically add extraneous information. Don't tell me what don't make up things, or, just seems like they just keep talking, so to speak. This is one of those less is more moments, and sometimes it's one of those things that, I remember a salesman, my favorite salesman of all time, went with me to a customer, and the first time I met him, I was like, boy, this guy can just talk for like 17 hours straight with one breath. So I'm sitting here thinking to myself, when we get him in front of the customer, what is he going to do? Oh my God. So we got into the customer, and he introduced us and sat in the corner and didn't say a word. Clearly not his preference, but he did what he needed to do in that particular instance. So he was a very well-educated extrovert, if you will, and he's been down the road a few times. So be careful about adding extraneous information. Present options. Too many options, the E and the P, if you remember the salesman being an ESTP, they want to get it out and they want to talk about all the options. And the ISTJ doesn't want to hear all the options. He wants to get it done. Another typical blind spot for an ESTP may be showing up on time, and it's barely. What they don't know sometimes is that for an ISTJ preference, early is not on time. So you got to be, as my dad is an ISTJ, and I grew up knowing that I was late if I was on time. I had to be there 15, 20 minutes early before I was considered on time. That's what we want to go. So that's what you got to be careful of if you happen to be an ESTP. Lack of follow-up and follow-through. ESTPs are notorious live-in-the-moment individuals, and that's fine. That works very well in certain instances, but it doesn't work so well when you're trying to sell something to an ISTJ preference, because that's the that'll put you out, and you won't get any business from that person, because that's what they're looking for. They want to see the follow-up, they want to see the communication, and when you say something, they want to see you do it. And I think it applies to everybody. I'm just giving you one example of this where it can come out, and the preferences is very important. And then the other blind spot that I put up here is knowing when the customer is ready to close. And that means that it might not mean we have to go to dinner. It might not mean that we have to go to the bar and have 15 beers before we're ready to go here. We might be ready to go in an hour, and the ESTP is only halfway through his presentation. And that presentation might be 3 hours instead of 15 minutes. So we got to be careful about those things if we happen to be those preferences. And again, those are all preferences are very valuable, but they're not all very valuable in every situation, and we got to be cautious of that. So what do we do? What do we do different? Actions to help seal the deal. Again, I mentioned to you early on, time means 10 minutes early for that individual. Keep it short and sweet. Stick to the facts, and provide some logical implications related to the facts. They don't want to hear stories. They want to see details, and that's one thing that can help. Describe that process step by step. Handhold that customer through the process. I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, I'm going to do this, and we'll all have a good deal, and they'll be happy with that. And simply move to closure. You got to be able to pick up when it's time to close the deal. Questions? All right. Let's talk about conflict a little bit. A leader with an INTP preference, introverted, intuitive, thinking, perceiving, needs to resolve a 3-day staff conflict about whether their company could take on work at a new customer. Again, sound familiar? Most of the integrators, most of the controls engineers, one of the biggest problems is finding enough people. Why? Because there's that much work out there right now, and so this is a very typical thing of taking on too much and burning your team out. Sound familiar? I would assume some of you are smiling or laughing or those sorts of things. This is it, and a lot of times those staffs, 75% of the staff's thinking and judging preferences, that particular staff. This is just an example, but again, in engineering cultures, if you will, a lot of times you do have a dominance of thinking and judging preferences. So now what do we do? What are the leader's blind spots, and what can this leader do to help resolve the conflict? Here's your blind spot. Can take too long exploring cause of the conflict. The P wants to solve every possible potential, down to the ones that have like a millionth of a % chance of actually being the issue. And that's, again, sometimes it does happen that way, but it's not the most likely suspect. So don't take too long. Keep your options too long there. So how do you do that? Be succinct. Be direct. Again, your team is thinking and judging, and you have an intuitive perceiving preference. So you're the odd person out in this scenario, and you have to be aware of that. Reinforce the value of other viewpoints, and that's important. Don't move too quickly, and reopening conflict is unlikely. So what am I saying there? Be careful about sealing the deal, if you will. Your team's going to want to gravitate towards picking a solution and moving on, and sometimes you do need to wait a little bit, but don't wait too long. It shouldn't take 3 days, but it might be well-deserved 3 hours. And once the team has decided the problem is closed, it's very, very, very difficult to get them to open back up and say, let's talk about this again. They've moved on. And if you want to do that, good luck. And then have everybody ready to act once agreed upon. And that's another key thing. That J preference team is looking for a plan of action. You being a P preference are not necessarily as adept at getting some of these things written down into into the detail leveled action plan that your team may want. And that may be if you happen to have a P preference and you've gotten any feedback from your teams over the years, that may be one of the critiques that you've heard, is that, hey, it kind of takes too long to make things happen. There's not enough detail in the plan. These are the kind of blind spots that we have to be aware of if we happen to be P preferences, is that when we're dealing with a J preference or a J preference team, this is one of the key things that we got to worry about. Okay, we'll move on to MBTI and how that can help you with managing change. A leader with an ESTJ preference has decided to implement a large change to personal accountability practices. 75% of his staff has introverted preferences, and then we got a 50-50 split on intuitive versus sensing and perceiving versus judging. So what do we do in this case? We've got a pretty big mix of, what's this leader's blind spots? How do they go into this? This is a big change. Most of our companies are growing, especially integrators. Integrators are not very large companies in the world stage. And as a result, for us, hiring 10 people could be a big deal. It's a game changer. Our cultures, how do we maintain our cultures in our company? How do we transfer those things? These are big deals to most people, and these are the growing pains that companies deal with, especially when you're bringing in people. Most of those people, we're not all fortunate enough to be able to bring in inexperienced and grow them from scratch, so to speak, and we hire people from other places, and that's just how that is. And they come in with their own set of ideas and values and things that they've seen. So when you're trying to introduce change is difficult. Change is going to have resistance. The question is how much. It's not a matter of whether or not there is any. So what is this person's blind spot? How do they reduce that resistance? The blind spots are they tend to exclude others from the decision-making process. They may take action before others are even ready. And they won't bend the rules. They're rigid. Even when exceptions are needed, they're rigid. So again, let's go back up a second. Take a look at this person. ESTJ, what does that mean? They're certainly extroverted. Okay? They get their energy from interaction with others. Their S's, S preference, they want to see details. They want to examine the history. They want to see how everything relates to things that has happened in the past. The T, the thinking. They want to see how those details that they just get, how the history is going to make a logical deduction. How are they going to come to a logical conclusion? And then the J preferences, they need to make it happen. They're not going to want to consider 15, 20 options. They want to consider one or two and move on. But they want to do it interesting enough with the group. And that's where some of the conflict comes in. So let's go back here. So they're ready to take action. Be careful of that. It won't bend the rules. That's that good old SJ dichotomy. Those two sticking up. SJs in some of the more advanced training, we call those is a temperament, and the SJ have the beloved nickname of the guardians. And the SJs are likely to cling to, or more likely to cling to historical references or things that have happened. And this is the way we do it, and that's just the way it is. So there sometimes, again, not all the time. You can learn, but if you're going to don't bend the rules, you can find a whole lot of those folks in the SJs. Okay, and then the other blind spot is staying focused on a task for the task's sake. Okay, so that's just putting your blinders on and going forward with something and not coming up for error every once in a while to see where you're at. And that's another typical thing that an ESTG may do without help from their team. So how do they reduce the resistance? Introverts, if you think about this team, they want time alone and they want to reflect on what's going on. So when we're managing change with our teams, if we have a lot of introverts on our teams, we can't just introduce something. We can't walk up in a town hall meeting with everybody involved and say, this is what we're going to do, period, take it or leave it, and give that kind of personality progression on everybody else. We've got to be very careful about how we do that, because we've already made up our minds as an ESTJ. This is what we're going to do, and that's what we got to be careful, because the introvert isn't going to buy it the first time you tell it to them. They might not buy it the second time you tell it to them. They're only going to buy it once they've had time alone in their own heads and think about it and what it could mean for them. Introverts also want to be asked what they think. The very nature of an introvert is that, they may not, they have just as many questions as your extroverted folks do. You got to pull it from them a little bit. And I know that you guys and gals out there today have run across this a lot. Some of your, they got really good ideas. They've demonstrated that in the past over years of service. But yet you're sitting in there and you're asking yourselves, why doesn't Joe say anything? Why doesn't Lynn say anything? I know they got good ideas, but you gotta ask them. And that's just, again, it's just kind of the way it is, and you got to learn to do that. Intuitives, on the other hand, we go into the end side of things. They want to know why. And the ESTJ might just want to walk up there and say, if they're not thinking about it, this is what we're going to do, and it's tactics. The intuitives want to know the whys. They want to see the strategy. They're not there to count trees. They're there to see the forest, if you will. So for an intuitive, if you can get them past the why, they'll be your biggest advocate. And I want you to remember that, because that's really important for the intuitives, because they're the ones that are, if you push them too fast, too hard, in cases, they're going to be the ones that are going to put up your stiffest resistance, only because you haven't clearly explained to them why we need to do things. You just want them to follow orders, and we got to be careful about that. But if you get them past why, they're all in, and that's something important to remember. Intuitives want to consider other options, maybe not as many as the perceiver judging kind of thing, but just in general, the intuitives want to consider options primarily from the perspective of they want to be able to consider those things as it relates to their internal models of how they think it should be. And maybe not quite an idealistic perspective, but at least, hey, their first guess is, this is why we're doing these things. If you didn't explain it to them, they're going to come up with their own whys. And it's up to you to determine whether that's right or wrong. Well, you'll see it in the resistance. And if you haven't considered, if they're pushing back on another option, they're probably questioning why we're doing something. So we got to be, again, got to be careful. Perceivers. So let's look at the P crowd. Perceivers want flexibility and more options. So again, getting out there in front of them, saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. Even if you explain why, they still want to hear. Sometimes all you got to do is say, we've considered these 3 other things. And receiver, oh, okay, you guys are flexible. You looked at some other options. But, if they're introverted perceiver, well, did you ask me about it? I have some good ideas too. So you got to be, the flexibility in the options is going to build resistance if you don't deal with them. And they want some room for mid-course correction. I mean, how many changes have you made that ever went perfectly from start to finish? If you're like most people, the answer is none or never. Every once in a while you get lucky is how that would be if it went perfect from start to finish. If certainly if there was any span of time, reasonable span of time. The perceivers, to get them to click in there is like, hey, tell me that we're going to go down this path. Here's why we're going down, and here's the steps we're going to take. And you know what? I'm going to throw in this little step in the middle called, hey, let's take a breath here and consider where we're at. Is this the right way to go? Can we consider another option? If you tell them that and then actually follow through with that, you'll have them on board at the beginning. They're more willing to go down that path with you at the start versus resisting and putting you in a position where you want to, go down this path right away, and you didn't give them an opportunity. For instance, maybe you didn't give them an opportunity to ask what they think, and that's perfectly acceptable in some cases. You can't ask everybody in the whole company for their opinion on everything. But the receivers, if you didn't do that, is like, okay, hey, we're going to stop there, and we're just going to take a look, come up for error, check to make sure we're going in the right direction. If we are, great. We're going to continue to move on. If not, we'll consider something else. That's what they want to hear. Questions? Okay. All right, we're going pretty quick here today. So hopefully, I've given you some good reasons why this can be a very good tool for you. And there are definitely different options as you walk away from here today, and consider what you want to do with this, if anything. And hopefully this gives you a little insight on how it can be used, what it's for, what it can tell you about yourself as well as others. And the 3 options I just listed here, a good option to do is just take the MBTI assessment on your own. There's plenty of practitioners out there that can help you with that. And again, why is that a good option? Because you're learning about yourself. And if you hear, if you read or study any of the leadership literature out there, you'll find that one of the biggest problems that we have is we're not aware of our own preferences, and we project them upon others, and that's one of the mistakes that we make. And even after you've had years of experience with certain things, you still tend to dive into those preferences on occasion, especially in times of stress or conflict or things like that. You're more likely to revert to your tendencies and your preferences versus the planned out approach. So go ahead and take that, because that gives you that knowledge, so that I know how I am. I might not know how my buddy is or my team member is, but I got a better chance than nothing to make sure that I'm aware of my own preferences and tendencies. A better option would be, hey, when we're done here, tell Jose and the CSI staff that, hey, we'd like to do this as a team and want to maybe an MBTI workshop at the beginning or prior to an executive conference that we have. Why is that better, not the best? Because it's not your team. It's not your company. But the good thing is that you get to see other people's differences all at once. And that's one of the most encouraging things of taking these with other people, is that you get that interaction. You get to see those preferences live and up front with heavy degree of focus. The other nice thing about a possible thing like this at this level is it's a group of peers. It's not necessarily rank and file and managers all mixed up in the same room. While that has its benefits, it also has its cons. So there's another option for you. Again, feedback's always welcome. And then certainly the best, in my opinion, is have an arranged MBTI workshop with you and your staff at your place of business. I would recommend that to anybody, and the reason is simply that these are the people that you work with on a day in, day out basis. And when you learn, you're learning about yourself, but you're learning about them at the same time. So again, there's pros and cons to all this. Of course, it takes time, and it does have some cost. I can tell you that I've done this a number of times with our staff, and I'm yet to have one person come up in our surveys, and we try to keep them anonymous as best we can, to tell us that this was a waste of time. In fact, more often than not, I get people to come up and say, "Man, that was really helpful, because I was having problems with understanding why Jim over there acts this way, and it's starting to irritate me. And now it's not an irritation anymore. It's simply just an understanding of that's how he is, that's his preferences, and how can I do that." We do have a question that came in, and I'd like to read that to you to make sure everybody hears it. Can people change their preferences as they gain more professional experience? Can they become more thinking as opposed to feeling? And the answer to that is twofold. Change their preferences is, I would say, no. And the reason is the theory behind the Myers Briggs Type personality experience is that you can, the MBTI measures what we call our innate traits versus the things that you've learned. And you can certainly, to your second point, is yes. So it's like a dichotomy answer here is, no, you're not going to change your preferences, but you can change how you work within those preferences. So thinking as opposed to feeling. If you happen to be feeling, how do I become more thinking? Well, it's getting into that thinking preference as you're engaging that individual is something that's a little easier to do, even though you still have your original preference. If, for instance, some people have taken this a couple times, and in the occasion that it changes, quote, I would personally question, first thing I would question is, how did you take it the first time? Unfortunately, not everybody has gone through the practitioner training. Particularly, the biggest mistakes are made in the areas of colleges and universities, where a lot of people have been introduced to this the first time. And unfortunately, in order for them to practition or conduct the assessment, they don't have to go through the training. And what that does is, unfortunately, it creates some bad habits in some teachers, and they didn't set it up right, and there's a context thing, and they might not have got you in the right place before you took it. So I'm going to say no. This is what you was born with. This is your preferences, but you can certainly learn a lot about the other type. So you can become more thinking in the way that you act in front of others. Is yes. In fact, that's what we're trying to do here. The question, may we get a copy of the presentation? I believe it will be, this is being recorded and will be published on the CSIA website, and Jose or Monica, you can correct me if I'm incorrect on that one. Okay. And finally, one of the things, regardless of what choice you make, please use a certified practitioner. And again, the biggest reason is the setup. When you're taking this thing, if you're taking it in the middle of the day at work and you're amongst all these other pressures, it's going to affect how you answer questions, because I can tell you as an introvert, if I take this in the middle of the day or right before I got to do some training, I know I'm getting myself already into the mode of being an extrovert, and I might ask or answer these questions based on what I think the company needs at the time. The other side of it is, well, I'll just do it at home, and that's most likely the most place you're going to be relaxed, but that might not be the best situation for everyone. And the reason is because, let's face it, those that have families and spouses and kids, and I happen to be one of those, sometimes I can't be in my preference all the time at home. I get home, things need to be fixed there as well, and I have to be in a certain mindset to make sure that happens. So the idea is to get you in a spot where you're truly no pressures from the world, so to speak, or get yourself into a mental frame that's correct there. So whichever option that you go with, I would emphasize that use a certified practitioner. It would be very beneficial for you as it relates to that. So that's all the questions that I see here, and I want to make sure I didn't miss any. Monica?
No, I haven't got any.
Okay.
I don't see any.
Okay. And I believe that's it. And on the presentation, as you will see, there's some references if you'd like to look into some of the stuff yourself. One of the things I was not able to do was this little video here, the third point down, and it's just a nice little 2-minute video on showing you just some high-level MBTI preference differences as well. It's published by CPP, and they're the quote owners of the MBTI assessment. And that's all I have. Thank you.
To all the attendees, thank you for your participation. My hope is that you have several takeaways. Let me also share something with you. Number one, we often hear that the biggest asset in companies are people. What we heard today, is something that helps people maximize this asset that they have by knowing how to best work with the different styles of the people that we have in our teams. I will also share that I did take this Myers Briggs Type Indicator twice in my life. One was at graduate school, and I took it years later at work. First fact is that my type, like Tony mentioned, didn't change at all, and I was surprised. I had forgotten what the results were when I took it in business school. And the other fact was that when I took it with my peers at work, it proved to be much more valuable and of immediate applicability because I was in a team. We were able to get to know each other through this test, and then we were able to apply it later on. So thank you very much again, Tony. It was a very good presentation, and thank you for your time and expertise. We also wish you and Premier System Integrators the best for your future, and keep up the good work. So we want to thank again our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. Be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. It will be arriving in your inbox within the hour, and it takes only 30 seconds to complete. It is very important for us to have this feedback to continue our improvement process. And this presentation will be made available to you after this presentation, and we'll let you know. So thank you all very much again. Please take a look. We continue to have these webinars on a monthly basis. We're going to have the next one on the 24th of September on a very interesting topic, so I'll let you review the newsletter and our website for the details. Without further ado, thank you very much, and hope to see you at our next webinar next month. Bye.